Hey, what's up you guys? Welcome back. So, Happy New Year, and apologies if I haven't been posting as frequently as I did before. If you're wondering why though, that's because I've been working on this particular video. So, I believe I have identified the next 10x to 20x opportunity. And this is actually not a stock, and as the title of the video suggests, this, in my opinion, is in fact Bitcoin. So today I'm going to go through my full bullish thesis on Bitcoin and why I believe it is potentially a 20x opportunity. So today's price is of around 29,000 US dollars per coin. A 20x will put it at around 580,000 US dollars per coin, which I know that sounds absolutely insane, but at least listen to my full bullish thesis first, right? And if after the entire video, if you watch the entire video and afterwards you still disagree, well then that's up to you, but at least hear me out. By the way, if you're interested in purchasing Bitcoin here in Canada, the service that I use is ShakePay, which I'll leave a referral link down below, where you can get a free $30 when you sign up and invest your first $100 worth of Bitcoin or Ethereum. So this is a referral link, so you don't have to use it if you don't want to, but if you do, it'll help me out, helps out this channel, and will be greatly appreciated. And lastly, a word of warning, whenever I do talk about Bitcoin, there's always a bunch of scammers down in the comments. So please, please, please do not send any Bitcoin to anyone. Do not reach out to anyone through text or through WhatsApp. Those are all scams, and the scammers might even try to impersonate me by taking my name and profile picture and whatnot. So I'm going to be moderating the comments as much as I can, but I will not get 100% of them. So some of them will inevitably slip through the cracks. So if you could do me a favor and report any spam that you see down in the comments, that could prevent members of our community from falling into these scams. So that would be greatly appreciated if you could do that for me. Okay, so this video is going to be super long since it's been a while since I've done one of these full bullish thesis videos, but that's okay. I'll sit here and talk for 2 hours if I need to. However, what I will ask is that if you don't mind to give me an early thumbs up on this video, that would be great. So it did take a lot of effort and time for me to research and do this video, so it would be greatly appreciated if you can give me an early thumbs up this time. Okay, so without further ado, let's jump in. Okay, so first I'm going to assume that you understand the basics of Bitcoin and what blockchain is. And if that's not the case, I recommend you brush up a bit about how the basics of blockchain works. So I don't want to waste time explaining the very basics, so I'll leave a link down below in the description of a video of someone who can explain it a lot better than I can. So feel free to watch that video first and then come back here if you need to. So I'm just going to assume that you know the basics. Anyways, let's jump in. So let's first go through the sort of value of Bitcoin, because I think a lot of people are looking at the price of Bitcoin and it's going up every single day pretty much, and it's went from like a few $1,000s to almost $30,000 per coin, and people are like, why is this thing so valuable, right? So let me try to explain why I think, in my opinion, why I think Bitcoin is so valuable. Now let me introduce you guys to this gentleman named Chamath. Now, I can never pronounce his last name, so I'm just going to call him Chamath for the rest of the video. So he was an executive of Facebook, and now he runs a fund called Social Capitals. He also went to the University of Waterloo, by the way, so shout out to my Waterloo boys. Where are you at? And girls. All right, so he also went to the University of Waterloo, and he's also the guy that's behind all the famous IPO series SPACs. So if you think like IPO A, which became Virgin Galactic, IPO B became Open Door, right? So like IPO A through I think is F now. He's a guy behind all of those, right? Anyways, he's a big believer in Bitcoin. So I saw this interview with Chamath where he told this story where trying to send money across borders through the traditional method of like wire transfers and whatnot is so much of a pain right now, right? So he was born in Sri Lanka, where in Sri Lanka, according to him, the access to banking is not that good, right? So if you have friends and family and you live in Sri Lanka, let's say you have friends and family from overseas and they're trying to send you money, well then you're gonna have to go through one of those like wire transfer places, like Western Union, like places like that, right? So to get the money, and all these like thugs would be standing outside of the Western Union waiting for you to come, and you have to pay them a cover charge to get in. So it's kind of like they are charging you money just to get your own money, and there's really no like alternative if unless you're talking about like digital technology like Bitcoin and whatnot, right? So it's kind of like you have to pay a fee to access your own money, and you have to pay these thugs who are not providing any value. They're just like kind of extortionists, right? So the way that we're sending money right now, if you need to wire money halfway across the world, even if you don't have to deal with thugs standing outside of a Western Union, it could still take weeks. and the fees will actually be quite substantial. So you have to deal with currency conversion as well. Don't forget that, right? So Bitcoin solves all of those problems, and it's fast, right? So a new block gets confirmed every 10 minutes. So every 10 minutes, it takes 10 minutes for you to send Bitcoin anywhere in the world. And the fees are pretty much a fraction of what you would pay if you were to send a wire transfer, right? So people compare Bitcoin to gold as well. So I don't even want to begin to think what it would take to send like a bar of gold halfway across the world, right? Imagine like the insurance that you have to pay on it, right? Imagine the cost, right? The transportation cost, because gold is really big and heavy. And second thing that I think is really valuable about Bitcoin is it's always brought up about the fact that Bitcoin is decentralized and free from control from any government. So here in the developed world, we don't really think about tyrannical governments that much, but I know people from other countries. Like I have friends from other countries, and you know what they tell me, right? They tell me that back at home in their countries, if you do something that the government of their country that they don't like, the government can just come to your house and just start taking your stuff, right? So there's nothing really you can do about it in that case even. So your house, your bank account, and even if you have gold, which is a physical asset, because it's so big and heavy, it's like hard to hide, right? So you're gonna have to find somewhere to hide it. If you put it in like a bank vault, right, the government can just seize it. So if you're afraid that the government might just take it, well then like gold might not be such a good asset either, right? So if you have like cash, you can forget about it. If you have real estate, if the government, like if you live in a country where the government can just take your things, well then that's not very secure, right? So Bitcoin can't really be confiscated in the same way. Well, I guess they could put a gun to your head and force you to tell them your passphrase, but that's a whole different topic, right? Surely Bitcoin is not like torture proof, but you get what I mean, right? So besides the confiscation thing, even if say you live in the United States or Canada where it's reasonably certain that the government can't just come to your house and take your stuff for no reason, well then the issue is that your money is still getting diluted by money printing. So the US government just passed 2 stimulus packages in the past year and created trillions of dollars out of thin air. So if you're storing all your money in dollars, then the value of your money inevitably goes down. So that's what inflation is, right? So if you look at Bitcoin, the supply of Bitcoin is capped at 21 million. So the way that the Bitcoin protocol is designed, that there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin, and it's not going to be until year 2140 where the last Bitcoin is mined. So we don't even have 21 million Bitcoin just yet. So correct me if my info is out of date, but the last thing I read was that there was about 18 million Bitcoin that's in circulation, or that's been mined right now, sorry, not in circulation. So about 4 to 6 million Bitcoin have been lost forever. So that's been taken out of circulation because people back then, they like Bitcoin was worth like $1 or less than $1 each, right? So people didn't really take it that seriously. So if they had a bunch of Bitcoin, they probably left it on a hard drive somewhere and they threw out the entire computer. So that Bitcoin is just gone. It can never be recovered, right? So it's just gone forever. So there's a ton of Bitcoin that's just gone forever. So right now, I think we're at about maybe like 12 to 14 million Bitcoin that are actually in existence, right? So, if you take 21 million minus 4 million, so that's about 17 million Bitcoin that will ever be like in existence. And 4 million is like more of a conservative estimate. As I said, it could be as much as like 6 or 8 million Bitcoin that's been lost forever, right? We don't really know. The point is that at this rate at which new Bitcoin are created, the system creates less Bitcoin as time goes on. So as time goes on, the amount of Bitcoin that can be new Bitcoin that can be mined, it goes down over time. So if you own 1 Bitcoin right now, that's about 1 out of 14 millionth of the share of the entire pie, right? Which I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but that actually is a lot if you're talking about like widespread adoption, right? There's 7.8 billion people in the world. I think there's only like 900 Bitcoin being generated per day out of like a 7.8 billion population across the world, right? So that rate at which new Bitcoin is mined is also going to go down over time. So my point is that the supply of Bitcoin is becoming less and less. In fact, with that in mind though, you can make the argument that it might be a crazy thing to do not to buy Bitcoin. So think about it. If you don't like invest in anything and you just work at a job and you get paid salary in dollars and you just keep all your money in bank account, right? Let's just say you keep all your money in the bank as cash, well then that's something that you know for sure is going to get diluted. So you can reasonably even predict how much your money is going to get inflated, because you can check inflation rates and you can check the news to see how much money that the government is committing to printing. So you're working hard and you're trading all your hard-earned effort and time for dollars, and then dollars turns out to be not a great store of value, because the value just goes down like as more money is printed and more money is diluted, right? So in this way, Bitcoin kind of behaves like gold, right? So it can be mined, and ultimately there's a limited supply of it. And except I would argue that probably Bitcoin is even better than gold because of the aforementioned reasons that I just talked about, with speed and transportability and storage and whatnot. And talking about gold being seen as a hedge to inflation, well, that's actually a feature that's extremely valuable that people have poured a ton of money into, right? So as long as paper money, or fiat money they call it, right? So as long as paper money exists and paper money can be printed, so gold has a market cap of around $10 trillion US right now. So that's the value of all the gold in the world, roughly. And Bitcoin, despite going up a lot in the past little while, is still at a market cap of around $500 billion or so. So there's your 20x right there, right? So if you're thinking it's absolutely insane for Bitcoin to do a 20x, well, maybe not so fast, right? If we just valued Bitcoin the same way that we valued gold, well then Bitcoin would be around like the $500 to $600,000 range already per coin. I mean, so never mind that we're discussing whether or not Bitcoin is better than gold. So if it's better than gold, shouldn't it be worth more than gold? So would Bitcoin have like a $15 trillion market cap, right? Gold has $10 trillion. If Bitcoin is better, should it be worth $15 trillion? I don't know. That's something to think about, right? So also another reason why Bitcoin might be better than gold is the divisibility factor. So Bitcoin is very easily divisible. You don't have to sort of buy and sell in whole numbers of Bitcoin. So the smallest number of Bitcoin is called a Satoshi, which is 100 millionth of a Bitcoin. So if you wanted to transact in gold in small amounts, well then that's very difficult, right? So if you had like a $20 gold certificate and you actually wanted to redeem it for gold, well then how are you gonna do that, right? So $20 of gold would be like microscopic, right? It would be very inconvenient. So lastly, I want to talk about Bitcoin being a potential for being a reserve currency. So for those of you who don't know what a reserve currency is, a reserve currency is something that's very well trusted by pretty much everyone to be something of value that central banks will hold in reserve, and it would use it to facilitate transactions, right? So I think that Bitcoin has a decent chance of becoming a reserve currency for sort of the globe, right? So a global reserve currency because of all the advantages that I just mentioned. So I'm not saying that this will happen for sure. Surely, like, it's not 100% like open and shut case, right? But we'll have to see. So I do see that if it does become a global reserve currency, well then obviously there's a lot of upside. And I think that Bitcoin definitely has the potential to become a global reserve currency, sorry. So anyways, that's the sort of value proposition of Bitcoin. So now let's talk about whether Bitcoin is actually succeeding in all that's trying to achieve, which is becoming this global currency that is secure and universal. So let me first bring up a chart right now. So over here we have a 90-day moving average of the amount of value in USD sent through Bitcoin network in a day. So let me slow down a bit, right? That was a mouthful. So in case you didn't get that, it's the average like value of how much money is changing hands in the Bitcoin network in a day on an average, right? So as you can see that it's approaching 40 billion USD per day. So I don't know why it says G, but apparently the G stands for billion. So if you do the math though, times it by 365, we're talking about like $14 trillion per year that's being facilitated by Bitcoin, assuming that it doesn't like go up in value even more, right? Or assuming that like the amount of transaction doesn't go up even more, which it has been for the past little while. So if you look at something like a PayPal, they're doing $250 billion worth of transactions per quarter. So that's just about $1 trillion per year. So we're talking about like moving $14 trillion per year on Bitcoin versus PayPal, which is moving $1 trillion per year. So if you look at like just the sheer numbers, that's like a 14x difference between Bitcoin and PayPal. And yet Bitcoin is only twice the valuation of PayPal. So that's a 2x difference. So I'm seeing this like mismatch between the amount of value that Bitcoin is moving and the amount of value that something like a PayPal is moving, right? Because face it, like PayPal is easier probably to understand and it's like a company, right? So people feel more comfortable investing in like PayPal stock stock than they do in Bitcoin. But I think that this disparity is sort of unjustified. And if we just see the pendulum kind of swing the other way, so if we see kind of like a balance where people start valuing Bitcoin the same way that they value, let's say, like gold or like PayPal like stock as like a payment network, well then the Bitcoin prices can skyrocket, right? So anyways, next thing I want to touch on is the fact that I'm seeing a lot of big institutions actually buying into Bitcoin or supporting Bitcoin. And talking about PayPal, they actually just announced back in October that they were launching a service that allows people to buy and sell crypto on their network. So this actually came as a sort of unexpected news when I first heard the news, because the former CEO of PayPal, Bill Harris, is famously known for being a very big Bitcoin bear. So he's very anti-Bitcoin, and he has stated on the record that he thinks that Bitcoin is a scam and that it's worth zero. So it's kind of ironic that Bitcoin is now supported on PayPal, right? So anyways, it's not just PayPal though. So you got Square's Cash App, and the CEO of Square, who's also the CEO of Twitter, by the way, his name is Jack Dorsey. So he's a huge fan of Bitcoin, and Square has also been enabling buying and selling of Bitcoin on their Cash App as well. So Square, the company itself, has also purchased Bitcoin and converted part of their balance sheet to Bitcoin. And also the biggest news out of them all surrounding institutions buying into Bitcoin is, of course, MicroStrategy, which is a company that makes data analytics software. So I've actually used their services before when I worked at Loblaw. So yeah, in case you didn't know, Loblaw primarily uses MicroStrategy for their like business intelligence analytics. I recommend you watch the interview with the MicroStrategy CEO with Gally from Hyperchange. So in the interview, the CEO of MicroStrategy, Michael Saylor, he explains why he thinks that Bitcoin is just going to go up in price dramatically and why he's so heavy into Bitcoin. And that's a very interesting interview. I'll highly recommend you watch it. I'll leave a link to it somewhere. But I think this recent news of institutions entrusting Bitcoin, well, that's a huge deal, because we're talking about multi-billion-dollar corporations buying into Bitcoin. So this isn't some Wall Street bet style YOLO anymore to buy Bitcoin, right? So remember that we had a time where buying Bitcoin was kind of like a YOLO bet. Well, remember that institutions, not retail investors, but these like multi-billion-dollar institutions, well, they have a fiduciary duty to shareholders. So they're not buying into Bitcoin because they want to make it big, right? Like in like day trading or something. Well, they do want to make money, right? But they're not like willing to take on the risk of like a day trader. So they're not like buying Bitcoin to day trade. They're buying because they see the value of Bitcoin. So I think a lot of people got burned back in 2017 when we had that huge spike up and Bitcoin crashed after that, right? So I don't want you to get that event confused with what's happening now, because as I said, even back then in 2017, I said it myself. Now, I didn't do YouTube back then, so I don't have video evidence of this, but just believe me, back in 2017, I myself said that the run-up of Bitcoin, it was a bubble, right? And I was right. The run-up back then was caused by retail investors instead of institutions, right? So it was retail investors just piling into the stock, or piling into Bitcoin, sorry, not the stock, but the coin, right? And institutions were kind of staying on the sideline, whereas now we're actually seeing the opposite. So I'm seeing some interest in retail for sure, but this time I say it's mainly institutions who's jumping on board. So if you don't believe me, just look at Google search trends, right? So it's coming up recently, but it's still barely a blip compared to 2017. So I think that most of us common folk are actually still not paying that much attention to what's happening with Bitcoin. So what's next though? What's the catalyst for growth, right? So I just said that big institutions are adopting it. So that's definitely one catalyst. What are some more catalysts for growth? Well, since we're on the topic of institutions supporting Bitcoin, the next thing I can see would be other more bigger institutions adopting Bitcoin, right? So I'm talking about companies like Apple or Google. If they were to jump on board on Bitcoin, this would be absolutely huge. What I mean is that imagine if Apple just built a Bitcoin wallet and it came pre-installed on every single iPhone. So imagine if they just let you buy and sell Bitcoin and they charge you a small fee every time you transact it. So same thing with Google, right? Imagine if every Android phone came with a Google wallet that accepted like Bitcoin transactions. So it's not a secret that Apple has been trying to get into the finance industry with rolling out their Apple credit card, partnering with Goldman Sachs. So if you're telling me that Apple is not at least thinking about getting into crypto, well then I don't really believe you, right? Because we have some of the smartest people working at Apple. So I'm sure that it's on their radar. And if you're thinking about how much money that Apple could potentially make from this, well, we all know how much Apple loves money, right? So something like this would cause Bitcoin adoption rate to skyrocket. If you could just imagine that every iPhone came pre-installed with a Bitcoin wallet. Chances are, face it, if you're not in the tech or finance industry, you don't understand what Bitcoin is right now. On a fundamental level, right? So raise your hand if you think I'm wrong, right? Raise your hand if you think you understand Bitcoin completely, right? You see what I mean? So it's not your fault that you don't understand it. I would say that 95% of people that I talk to do not understand Bitcoin. And the prices and adoption rates are already skyrocketing just with that like 5% of people who do their research into Bitcoin and do understand what it is. So if you think that Bitcoin has no more room to run, well, I think that you might be surprised. Once more people come to research Bitcoin and come to understand Bitcoin, I'll let you finish that thought, right? So next thing, there was a rumor that Elon Musk was actually going to convert part of their balance sheet, part of Tesla's balance sheet, into Bitcoin. So he didn't end up actually doing it, or at least not yet. And I think if he does, it would be also a huge deal. So Tesla has what, like $14 billion of cash on the balance sheet. Let's just say that they did 10% in Bitcoin, right? $1.4 billion. I think at that point, it become a self-fulfilling prophecy if Elon buys Bitcoin, because it'll just encourage other companies to buy Bitcoin as well, right? And it'll just bid up the price. So Tesla is what, like the 6th largest company in the S&P 500 after being added. So if Tesla does it, then that's going to pressure a lot of other CEOs to do it. And if they're going to be asked questions about like, why aren't you buying Bitcoin from analysts and from shareholders? And they're going to ask the CEOs, like, why aren't you doing it, right? So like if Tesla did it and then Tesla see their balance sheet just kind of skyrocket, then the CEOs are going to face a lot of pressure to be converting part of their own balance sheets into Bitcoin as well. So if more companies get involved in Bitcoin, at some point the pressure is going to extend to government and policies as well. So right now, the government is kind of resistant to cryptocurrency, and I kind of get it, right? So not being able to control the currency, it takes the power away from the government. So the government doesn't like that. But at some point, who funds the government, right? So who pays the politicians? It's lobbyists and special interests and corporations, right? So like it or not, politics is driven by special interests and corporations. And if these corporations start to become pro-cryptocurrency, well, then that's going to put a huge amount of pressure on government to be also pro-cryptocurrency. Because at some point, we're going to get politicians that are pro this stuff. And talk about government, I just touched upon the resistance of politicians to cryptocurrencies. Well, then at some point, it almost kind of becomes a game theory type of thing, where if one government bans cryptocurrency and other governments support cryptocurrency, well, then it's kind of create an imbalance, right? So like, for example, if China and Russia bans crypto, well, then America is just going to say, oh, well, we love crypto because we have this thing that's like, 29 or 30,000 US dollars per coin. If you don't want it, well, take it, right? So guess you guys don't like money. And if the opposite happens, if America bans Bitcoin, well, what's to stop China and Russia from going, well, we love Bitcoin. This thing is worth so much. Give us some more of that, right? So it becomes kind of like a game theory where I feel like the inevitable like Nash equilibrium is that everybody kind of adopts Bitcoin and agrees that Bitcoin has value. So Gally from Hyperchange was talking about what he calls the Bitcoin FOMO apocalypse, where more and more institutions start buying up Bitcoin because say they don't want to hold cash anymore. They're losing faith in this fiat currency, this paper money, and because the supply of Bitcoin is so limited and fiat currency gets inflated because we're printing more of it, but you can't print more Bitcoin. So it's going to cause like a huge panic buy of corporations and institutions that are trying to get into Bitcoin, and just going to cause more and more people to pile in, and the price is just going to start skyrocketing, right? So we're going to see this shift away from like fiat currency into cryptocurrencies. And lastly, I know a lot of you are fans of ARK Invest, and they have a price target of $400,000 per coin, which again sounds insane right now. but I think that I have to remind you that they're right on Tesla, right? And I know a lot of you do like what ARK Invest has to say, and they've been right on many other bets in the past as well. So I highly recommend you watch this interview with ARK Invest analyst Yassine Almondra, and he did a great interview with Dave Lee on investing about Bitcoin. So I highly recommend you go watch that video if you want to know what ARK Invest think of Bitcoin. Hint is very bullish. Okay, so now let's talk about some criticisms about Bitcoin. So I talked about all these benefits and all these like growth catalysts, but what are some criticisms of Bitcoin, right? What are some like bear cases? Well, the first thing I hear from Bitcoin bears is always that, oh, Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, it's the greater fool theory, right? So if you're buying Bitcoin, you're buying it for the sake of selling it to someone else for a higher price. And to that I have to say, I feel like a lot of people who are saying that Bitcoin is a Ponzi scheme, they don't really understand the technology behind Bitcoin, or they don't understand the idea of a global, decentralized, secure currency itself. So, you know, if that's your opinion that it's a Ponzi scheme, you're free to think so. But I'd actually ask you to actually research into blockchain technology and Bitcoin slightly more and related tech like that before you just arrive at your conclusion that it's a Ponzi scheme, right? So if you fully understand Bitcoin and you fully understand the technology and you still think that it's a Ponzi scheme, well, then that's up to you, right? But I feel like a lot of people who are just jumping to these kind of conclusions, they don't really understand it at first, right? They didn't really fully research it first. Because in my opinion, if you actually understood the technology and the actual like idea and the value proposition of Bitcoin, and think about the way that it's disrupting our financial system on like a fundamental level, I think that any logical person would conclude that the value shouldn't be zero, right? So you can make an argument that, okay, maybe that this tech is not that revolutionary, right? It doesn't bring that much value to the world, so it shouldn't be worth $30,000 per coin. But again, like I don't think that it should be worth zero, right? So I think that I would recommend you do research once again about Bitcoin before you jump into that conclusion. So I think the main point of the argument that of this argument of the like greater fool theory or whatnot is that Bitcoin is not backed by anything, right, other than itself. And well, yes, this is true to some extent. I would argue that, well, gold is not backed by anything either, right? What I mean is that gold has no intrinsic value. So you know, maybe it has intrinsic value being as a component, being a conductor in electronics, but you know, gold is worth $10 trillion. And I would say that most people who's buying gold, they're not using it to manufacture electronics. I think that this idea, though, of intrinsic value in currency is actually overrated, because there are very few assets that we can use as currency that actually does have intrinsic value. So currencies that have intrinsic value are things like bushels of wheat, cigarettes, barrels of oil. In my opinion, those things are like not that good if you insist on using them as a currency, right? So these things that have intrinsic value, they're not really suitable for being a currency unless you want to revert back to the barter system, right? So I think that you can argue that paper money's intrinsic value is the government, maybe. But once again, the problem with paper money is that the government dilutes your money by printing more of it. So the value of your money goes down. So yeah, you say the dollar is being backed by the government or being backed by the military. Well then, yeah, that might be true. But then your share of the pie kind of goes down as it gets more diluted. And if you're going to make that argument, what's to stop me from saying that Bitcoin's intrinsic value is the value of the network and the technology that is running the network, right? So I don't know. I'm not an economist, so maybe someone who knows a little bit more about economics can comment down below and explain sort of what their opinion of this is, right? So anyways, next argument is that I hear is I can't buy coffee with Bitcoin, therefore Bitcoin is a failure. Well, I think that this comes from a misunderstanding of how our financial systems work. So when you tap your credit card or debit card, what you don't realize is that like sits on top of a payment network. Think like Visa, MasterCard, or PayPal, or American Express, or whatever. So that sits on top of a payment network, which is backed by a bank or issuer, which is backed by the central bank, which is backed by assets on its balance sheet and reserve currencies. So with Bitcoin, we're talking about like level 1. We're talking about like the base level, whereas like buying coffee, that's actually like level 4, level 5, or even higher levels, right? So you see what I mean, right? So this system is like multiple layers deep, and with Bitcoin, we're starting at level 1. So we're not not at that like level yet with Bitcoin. The fact that you can't buy coffee with Bitcoin is not really a big deal because that's not like what it's designed to do right now, right? So what it's designed to do right now is like a medium that facilitates transfers between like big institutions and central banks. Surely you can use it for smaller transactions as well. I'm not saying that you can't use it for smaller transactions, but I'm saying that like the fact that you can't buy coffee with Bitcoin is not a big deal. In my opinion, it's not really what it's designed to do at the moment, at least yet. So anyways, next let's talk about the downside of investing in Bitcoin. Well, I shouldn't say investing because you're not really investing, you're just kind of converting your cash into Bitcoin. So what's the benefit or what's the downside of putting your money into Bitcoin? Because we talked about the benefits a lot, right? So what if I'm wrong? And what if Bitcoin doesn't do a 20x? What if it goes to zero, right? What it would take for this to go horribly wrong and what it would take for Bitcoin to actually go to zero. So think about what it means for Bitcoin to go to zero though. The way I see it, that it's either going to be 400K per coin, or like ARK Invest said, or it's going to go to zero, right? So I don't really see that there's really any other like in between in the long term. This experiment to fundamentally change our financial system is either going to succeed or it's either going to fail. So Bitcoin will go to zero if this experiment fails. So in order for Bitcoin to go to zero though, I think several things have to be true. So first, we're going to have to collectively decide that Bitcoin, like this idea, is not worth anything. So if Bitcoin hits zero, this means that we're all going to have to collectively decide that there's nothing wrong with paper money and gold and with the system that we have right now. So we already have both of those things. Why do we need another thing, right? So why don't we just stick with paper money and stick with gold? Why do we need technology to improve this thing, right? So why do we need technology to add to the mix? So, you know, all these benefits that I mentioned about Bitcoin in the beginning, we're all going to have to collectively all agree that those benefits, they're worth nothing, right? They're worth zero. So we're also going to have to decide that blockchain technology is not worth anything. Now, I know you're going to say that Bitcoin is different than blockchain technology, and they're two separate things. Well, Bitcoin was the first thing that brought Bitcoin technology into light, right? So I have a really hard time imagining a future where, you know, Bitcoin just goes to zero and blockchain technology just absolutely takes off. So I don't really see that being the case, right? I don't really see that ever being like possible to happen. So in my opinion, it's very unlikely though for any of those things I just mentioned to be true. So for like us to all collectively decide that Bitcoin, this idea is not worth anything, right? So I think that I highly doubt that Bitcoin will go to zero, but you never know, right? There's always a risk to everything, and I can't be right 100% of the time. So please make your own judgment. All I'm saying is that we have something right now that I'm seeing where the risk to reward is absolutely amazing. So we have a very low chance that Bitcoin is going to suffer like a 90 or 90% drop, but the upside is like 20%, not 20%, 20x, sorry. So if it was only 20%, this would be kind of a bad bet. But like, yeah, we have like a 2000% upside, right? So I'm talking about long term though. So 5 years plus. So obviously in the short term, anything can happen. Bitcoin has been known to be sort of volatile. So if you're going to buy into Bitcoin, expect the volatility. But long term though, I do see this risk to reward is absolutely amazing. So with all that being said though, what's my personal position in Bitcoin? Again, don't just copy me, or please do our own research, but you know, I'm sure people will ask what's my own personal stake in Bitcoin after you know, raving about Bitcoin for this entire video, right? Well, you know, I didn't have that much cash left over after an amazing 2020 in stock market, so I've just been pouring a lot of money into the stock market, but I will be converting a major part or most of my remaining cash balance into Bitcoin and a little bit into Ethereum as well. So I'll still keep some cash left over as emergency fund. Of course, I'm not going to convert 100%, but I am planning on ramping up my position in Bitcoin in a major way in the coming months. So right now I have just about a $6,600 position in Bitcoin, and those are US dollars, by the way. So my plan is to get to 1 BTC eventually. So hopefully the price doesn't take off. So I'm pretty far away from that goal right now, but hopefully the price doesn't take off and I'll be able to actually build up to 1 BTC, right? But it'll take some time before I accumulate that much cash in order to buy into that much Bitcoin. But anyways, that's my plan, at least for now. Anyway, so that was a super long video, and be sure to give a like if you've stuck around for this long. If you haven't already, you're a real trooper if you've stuck around for this long. So thank you very much once again, and that was my full bullish thesis. Let me know down in the comments whether you think I'm right or I'm wrong. So I'm really curious to see what the community thinks. So anyways, I'll leave the video here. Be sure to hit the like button once again, and consider subscribing if you haven't already. Be sure to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, links down below in the description as always. And with that being said, I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye-bye.